Hi and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then my name is Soph and I'm due to be starting at the University of Cambridge this academic year studying physical natural sciences. This video is all about how to write your personal statement, so it's kind of aimed at year 12 or really just anyone looking to apply to university in the UK via UCAS. So the first piece of advice I want to give is to read some sample personal statements. So maybe your school or college have sent you some of these to read. If not, there is a massive page on the student room, which I will link in the description, which has loads of personal statements for all universities and all subjects. And also at the bottom it often says what universities they applied to, whether or not they got an offer, what their offer was, what their A-level grades, GCSE grades, all of those kind of things are, which I found really helpful when I was writing my personal statement because it gives you an idea of what is required in a personal statement, what works well, but also I think quite importantly what it's like to be an admissions tutor reading loads of these statements. So you begin to notice patterns, things that are really boring, and things that stand out which you can then apply to your own statement. So something that's really good to do is to keep a log of any supercurricular activities that you've done over the past few years. Specifically, what did you learn, what was good about it, and what did you do after. So maybe you watched a documentary on a certain topic and then it gave you lots of questions, so then you went off and you researched it further. That kind of stuff is really great. The next thing is that you want to get your personal statement done early. So by this I mean you don't want to be doing it a couple of weeks before the deadline. But equally I know a lot of people are panicking at the moment, so we're kind of mid-July and they're panicking because they don't have a really good personal statement. To be honest, you don't need a good first draft until September. And that's more for if you're applying for medicine or Oxbridge, so your deadline is the 15th of October, because I know that I used the summer to do a lot more things to put on my personal statement, so it'd be quite difficult to write a personal statement before you've done half the things that you're going to mention. Obviously if you're not planning to do anything, then by all means write it now, but don't panic if you haven't got a good first draft yet. As long as you've got it done at least 2 weeks to a month before your deadline, that's absolutely fine. Most of the things that you mention should be recent, so basically don't keep banging on about things that you did when you were like 11 or 12 or even younger. It's fine to mention a couple of things that you did when you were younger, but most of the things you mention should be quite recent. Overall, you want to aim for 4 to 7 paragraphs in total, and I'll mention more about how many paragraphs for each section later. It's really good if you can link things together to show how different topics link together. So maybe you came across something in your A-level and then a couple of months later you read a book and there was some kind of link. So if you can draw on that kind of thing, that's really great because it shows that you've got an appreciation for the wider subject rather than just specific subjects within that. If possible, add course details that are specific to the course that you're applying to. Obviously this only works if there is something specific for all of the courses you're applying to, because your personal statement will go to all of those universities. So maybe you've applied for a year abroad. That's something really great that you could mention why you've done that, what you hope to gain from that, as it just makes it feel a bit more personal to the university and they can see you've clearly researched their course and that you're really interested, and that will just generally boost your application. The next thing, which you probably notice if you are to read a load of sample personal statements, is that a lot of people try to use really over-the-top language. So basically it sounds like they've swallowed a thesaurus. Definitely don't do that, especially if that is not how you would talk on an everyday basis. But as well as that, whilst you probably are really enthusiastic about your subject and you definitely want that to come across, be careful of sounding overly enthusiastic because then it can almost sound fake. And that's hopefully something that when you get other people to read your personal statement that they would pick up on. So don't worry about that too much, but if you do get someone to say, oh, it sounds a little bit too over the top, maybe just tone down some of the words a little bit, because your passion should come across with the amount of stuff that you've done. and what you've gained from that, so you don't need to use loads of fancy language to convey that, and definitely don't use the word passion. The next thing is through open days, possibly online this year as well. If your university has given you any advice specifically about what kind of things they like to see in personal statements, so I know that some are much more bothered about academics, whereas others really like to see stuff about you as a person. Basically anything that your university has said, you definitely want to try and include that, because it's literally free advice on what the admissions tutors are looking for. Generally, most universities are very similar, but I know for a couple of the universities that I applied to, there was the odd thing that they said they did really like or really didn't like, so I did try to include or not include those. Everything that you mention in your personal statement needs to add some kind of value, so there is no point just having a throwaway statement like, I did Gold DV. Okay, well that's great. What did you learn from it? Why did you do it? How is that relevant to your application? Like, why should I know that, rather than just saying that you did it because, yeah, okay, that's great, and that is quite a generally well-respected thing, but you need to then show how you used that experience to help you. Ultimately, the key thing that your personal statement needs to say is some stuff about you, but mostly, why have you chosen this subject? What is it about this subject that you are really interested in? Show us basically that you are interested in this subject. Tell us why, tell us what you hope to gain from it, all of those kinds of things. So it needs to be really tailored to the subject that you are applying to. If you're doing an EPQ, I think it's a good idea to mention your EPQ and basically just have a line or two about your EPQ and what you're hoping to gain from it. So maybe if you're hoping to go into research in the future, you could say, well, this is a great opportunity for me to see what that's like, and to check that, yes, that is something that I'm interested in doing in the future. Or maybe you could say, I was really interested in this topic, which we came across at school, and I wanted to look into it further, so I did an EPQ, or maybe it was something that you read about, anything like that. I think it's just really good to mention, because not all universities will give like a grade drop for doing an EPQ. Some do, so they say if you get like an A in your EPQ, instead of our usual offer, which is 3 A's, we'll give you AAB. So not all universities do that, but then it can still be worth doing an EPQ, because it is a really great super curricular and you learn lots of things, and it really does demonstrate your love for the subject, because it is quite a commitment. So why would you do that if you weren't genuinely interested in the subject? So I think for that reason, it's really good to mention it on your personal statement. Obviously, it's not essential. You know, if you think there are other better things to mention, that's fine. But as a general rule of thumb, I think it is quite a good thing to mention if you've done it. If you are planning on deferring, so if you're applying this year, not to start the following year, but to start the year after that, in which case you're taking a gap year, or maybe you've already taken a gap year, you should probably, at least at some point, briefly explain why you've done that. What did you gain from that? That could be work experience, just general life experience, maybe you went travelling, whatever the reason was, maybe you needed a bit more money to save up so that you could go to university, whatever it is. I just think it's a really good idea to mention either what you're going to do or what you've done during that year, just so they know that you weren't just sitting around doing nothing, because that's probably not great for your brain. And basically they don't want you to have forgotten everything, particularly with STEM subjects. It's also a great idea to mention any relevant awards or achievements. So this doesn't include things like your GCSE or A-level grades, because they can see that on your UCAS form, but maybe you did loads of Olympiads that you just scored really well on, or maybe you got some other award at school, or I know sometimes mentioning things like UMS that isn't on your UCAS form, some universities really like that. So if you do have anything like that, it could be worth mentioning. Please don't put any quotes in. Literally every uni says this, and for some reason it is still on some websites where they're like advising you about how to write a personal statement. They say, oh, include a quote. Unless you have something that's absolutely fabulous, which chances are you don't include a quote. Universities say they would much rather hear your words than someone else's, so basically your personal statement should be filled with your own words, not other people's words. Don't try to be too clever or quirky. So I remember reading a personal statement that a couple of personal statements that were really quite odd, and they had some kind of really abstract storyline, and yes, maybe it'll go really well, but the chances are it'll be a complete flop and you'll just confuse whoever's reading it. I read one that was following like this story of how they were like the parts of a clock, and then at the end it was like, just as a clock is more than the sum of its parts, so am I am much greater than the things that I've done. And it was just very odd, and it came across as quite big-headed, and personally I really didn't like it. I had another friend who applied for medicine who started her personal statement with, "I didn't want to be a doctor." Now, I thought that was really quite bold and certainly something that I wouldn't have done. There were a lot of mixed feelings about her doing that. Some thought it was really bold and really attention-grabbing, which it probably was. Whether that worked in her favour or not, I don't know. She did get an offer from the university she wanted, so I suppose it was all right in the end, but just be very careful with things like that. I read another personal statement for someone applying for engineering, and at the end they said, "I hope to contribute more to science than my tuition fee." As funny as that was reading it, I don't think an admissions tutor would appreciate that, so try not to write anything like that. Another thing to definitely stay away from is cliche things. So when I was 5, I dismantled a toaster and I knew from that moment forth that I was destined to be an engineer. Just don't do it. Or things like, when I came out of the womb, or I always knew that I was destined to study Spanish. Anything like that, or really common things that everyone's done. So for example, if you're applying for physics, don't mention that you've read A Brief History of Time, because loads of admissions tutors have said if they see that, basically they just put down your personal statement because they're bored. So yeah, if you're applying for physics, don't do that, or whatever your subject's equivalent is. Another thing is, don't lie. It's really common for people to say, "Oh, I read this book," and they didn't, and I really don't understand why you would do that, because if you haven't read it, then you can't say what you would gain from it. So how do you then develop that and show that you got value from it? And then ultimately, what's the point in mentioning it in your personal statement if you can't do that? So just don't lie. There's literally no point, and it will definitely come back to bite you on the bum. And the last piece of advice before I go into more specifics on how to actually write it is to get as many people as possible to read your personal statement and give feedback. So get your parents to read it, your friends to read it, definitely your teachers, that's the most important one, and just see what they say about it, because the more opinions you can get on it, personally, I think the better. There are going to be some points where people disagree about things, in which case that's down to you, but as a general rule of thumb, I think the more opinions the better, especially if you find that the same things are coming up again and again. So if everyone doesn't like a specific paragraph, then maybe you want to delete that and write a different one. So just things like that are really helpful. Okay, now on to the nitty-gritty of how you should structure it, what should you say at each point. So for the introduction, you probably want to write about a paragraph. If you do have some amazing story about how you came to know that you wanted to study this subject, then great, put it in there. If it's something really cliche, don't. But if you do have some amazing story that you think is quite unique, then yeah, definitely do put that in there. I didn't, and I don't think most people will, so that's completely fine. I think if you can, say something quite bold. So, for example, for history, you might say, "History is the past, present and future." Brilliant first statement. It is quite cliche now, a lot of people have used that, so don't use that specific one, but it does give you an idea of the kind of thing that you could say to grab their attention. I know that Ibsmo had a really great starting line that I think definitely would have grabbed the reader's attention. So if you can write something like that that really demonstrates why you're interested in your subject, that's really great. Obviously, don't write anything that's incorrect, so definitely make sure that you fact check whatever you've written, and try not to be too abstract, because again, that just comes into the thing that I said earlier about trying to be too quirky and clever. You don't want it to backfire, but something attention grabby is really great. And basically, it should relate to your interest in the subject. So whether that's the story about how you got into the subject, or whether it's something bold about the subject which then shows why you find it really interesting. Then you want to move on to the middle, which should be 2 to 4 paragraphs, an absolute maximum of 5 paragraphs, so that you can really develop each one. And this is where you really want to pack in your supercurriculars and work experience, especially if you're applying for medicine. And then you want to make sure that you develop everything. So what did you learn from it? Why was it good? How did it then lead you on to something else? What value basically did you take from it? It should definitely be predominantly subject related, so this isn't really the time to be mentioning your extracurriculars unless they are relevant. Again, make sure everything that you say is factually correct, because that just demonstrates that you have good subject knowledge. Obviously, if you say something that is actually not correct and an expert in the subject then comes and reads your personal statement and then they see that you've made a mistake like that, that's not going to reflect very well on you, which is another reason why getting your teachers to read it is a really great idea, because they hopefully will spot any mistakes like that you have made. And then something that I did that I found really helpful was, if you've written any applications for work experience, summer schools, any programs like that, look up like a record of what you wrote, and basically you could use those paragraphs that you wrote for that as a starting point, particularly any ones that were successful, as that kind of already gives you an idea of what to write and what works well, and basically you can tailor that and build off that. So most of the middle of my personal statement did come from applications that I'd sent for summer schools and things, and I definitely think that made writing my personal statement a lot easier. And then you have your conclusion/ending, which should be kind of 1 to 2 paragraphs, and in this section usually people write about their extracurriculars, because no matter what university you apply to, you do need to mention at least something. Even for Oxbridge and really high level universities like that, although they are definitely more interested in your academics, they do say that they expect to see it, and I think there is kind of a we want to see that you are human aspect to it, whereas other universities are much more eager to see this kind of thing because they're much more interested about you as a person and what you might add to the university. So maybe you were in your school choir and then you could say, I'm really interested to continue this at university and join this specific society which is related to that, or maybe you played for your school's hockey team and now you're looking to play hockey for the university. So things like that are really great to mention. And then kind of a summary, so what do you hope to gain from this degree? What do you want to do with your degree? What are you looking forward to? Anything like that. Obviously try not to say anything really generic like, I'm looking forward to meeting new people and getting some independence. But things like, I'm really interested in learning more about this specific topic, or I really hope to gain these specific skills. Anything like that is really great to put in the end. Personally, I think the introduction and the conclusion are the hardest bits to write, so if you are really struggling with that, hopefully this will help, but if not, write out the middle thing and then go back to it and see if that helps. I know some people are still stuck between 2 subjects, so maybe you're stuck between whether you want to apply for physics or engineering, or physics and maths, or English or a language, something like that, in which case, if you can't decide, what I'd recommend is that you write a personal statement for both, and then hopefully that process will actually tell you which subject you should be applying for, because hopefully you will find one easier than the other, in which case that's probably the subject that you should be applying for. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and hopefully, especially given the current situation with a lot of students not being in school, this will have acted as that assembly that you might have had at school under normal circumstances. So I wish you all the best of luck with writing your personal statements and applying to university. Thank you for watching.